Are you ready? Okay, you have to pick up the mic. All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to The Field Between, a podcast about being infirm and infirmity in general. This is Ahmed.
What?
I'm with my co-host and wife, Yasmin Flodin Ali, PhD, who is also infirm.
Yes, neither of us are feeling very well today. Ahmed was sick first. You started feeling sick just yesterday, right? Or was it the day before that?
Yep. We both feel like shit, but we
and
still
I'm
have
now feeling sick, yeah.
reason to celebrate.
We do. I just passed my doctoral defense today.
Yes.
So everyone needs to call me Dr. Flodin Ali all day. That's the rule.
Yeah.
We might have to redo this intro just so I'm introduced as Dr. Flodin Ali. No, I'm kidding.
I'll edit.
No, don't. I'm totally teasing. But yeah, I'm really
unfortunately,
excited.
not the kind of doctor who can help us with our immediate
No, not that kind of doctor.
infirmity.
The kind of doctor that can just talk about an idea. The really helpful kind.
Right.
Yeah, but I'm really grateful and excited to finally be able to say I'm a doctor. It's been a long road, and it's been so fun and nice, like reconnecting with people, and people are so kind and congratulatory. It's really been a nice day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good job.
And we got a really big sandwich today to celebrate.
Got a big sandwich to celebrate.
Yeah, and we got like nice drinks.
Went in there and asked
I
them
got
for
boba.
the biggest sandwich they had.
We did. And then tomorrow, inshallah, unless we're feeling really bad, but hopefully we'll be feeling well enough, we were going to go get dinner at one of our favorite restaurants, which is also, we just wanted to go there before we left the area.
Probably get a big sandwich there too.
No, we're going to get some cute small plates, but yeah.
Well, if they have a big sandwich, I'm getting it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good.
Okay.
Any other updates? How are we doing? How are you feeling?
Like shit. I'm infirm.
I know, but besides that, how are you feeling about moving? We're moving on the 22nd. It's the countdown's continuing.
Yeah. I'm excited.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. I'm feeling more and more excited, to be honest. I think also I'm grateful that I've had this in-between time. I've really gotten to see a lot of friends, and that's felt good.
Okay.
We're going to be discussing Exit West today by Mohisin Hamid, which I'm super excited. I love this novel. I'll say more on it later, but what items do you have for us before we get into that?
Yeah, a couple things. This video has been making the rounds.
Oh, should I have headphones on, or am I good?
No, I'll just play it out loud. This is one of those campus preachers.
Okay, we have one of these at UNC's campus.
I don't know which college this is at, but it got pretty popular.
Buy her one margarita, she will spread her legs.
That's the title of the video.
If you buy her 2 margaritas, she will pounce right on your penis.
Oh, God. They're like affirming her, and she's saying like a bad thing.
She will grab your penis and put it in her mouth.
It's honestly kind of wholesome.
Margaritas.
Yeah, it feels like a song, like 20, what's that song about beer on the wall?
She will grab your penis and ram it right up her anus.
Oh my gosh, straight for the anus. Skip some other holes there.
2, 3, 4, 5.
She will strap it on and peg you.
Is this a joke?
No,
I think this is a joke.
No, it's not. It's a real campus preacher
Really?
lady, and everyone's it's just a bunch of kind of like frat bros. It looks like they're around there just egging her on, and having a good time.
I kind of enjoy our campus preachers. They're pretty vile, but
Most of them are.
they really interact with the students. And I might have mentioned this before, I can't remember, but on Rate My Professor, which is, a website where you rate professors, someone gave like the main campus preacher a profile, and it's hilarious.
Really?
Yeah, it's like good lecturer, kind of angry, like stuff like that. I've never seen a woman actually preaching on campus. I've only seen men.
I know. Actually,
Yeah.
that's the first one I've seen.
Yeah, good
Impressive.
for her.
Yeah.
Maybe
really
it's all the penis specific,
material.
stuff that's made
She
her
really broke through.
yeah.
Yeah. She's good at crowd work for sure.
Yeah.
Other stuff that I have, just a couple of updates that I thought were interesting. A lot of new entrants into the presidential campaign race.
Some breaking news.
Some breaking news, fresh, hot off the presses. Mike Pence You've heard of him, right?
I have, yeah.
Going to be running against Trump. Any thoughts on that?
No, Trump, DeSantis, Mike Pence, they're all a nightmare.
Uh-huh.
I honestly don't know which of the three is worse.
Presumably, he's entering to peel away votes from Trump to make room for someone like DeSantis.
I wonder if he thinks that he can win because he can like get the Christian right in a way that a lot of Christians maybe he's hoping will be like, oh, well, you actually stand for our values in a way that Trump just gave lip service to, or, you know, he was the best approximation. But Trump is going to win, honestly.
Trump even has the Christian right. Well,
that's what I'm saying. I feel like maybe Pence thinks that he can get those folks because the Christian right, a lot of them like will articulate like, well, like, you know, we don't think that Trump is a perfect Christian, but he stands for our values and he promotes, you know, whatever.
But they see him as a traitor to President Trump. And
a lot of the far right people do. Yeah.
Trump.
Yeah.
There's no way. He doesn't have the juice. I think they're trying to just use him to peel away some votes from Trump.
I don't know. Yeah.
Chris Christie, there was a piece also that was saying Chris Christie was going to re-enter the presidential race.
He declared, I think, right?
Yeah. He's a loser.
I know. I can't believe that Christie's running again. That's embarrassing for him, honestly.
Yeah, Trump absolutely embarrassed him in the last campaign.
And his whole bridge thing happened then. Yeah, it was embarrassing for everyone involved. That's so many of them, though, right? I mean, I remember Lindsey Graham was so anti-Trump. And then, like, to the point where a lot of people were speculating that Trump must have some dirt on him because he did such a 360 and became such a Trump supporter. It was bizarre.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I remember the night he got elected, or maybe like the week of, he went on to the Daily Show.
Yes, I remember that clip too.
Pool with like John Stewart still?
I think he was Trevor Noah at that point. Yeah.
But he was looking disheveled. Like he was actually worried about
the country
Trump becoming,
and then literally weeks later, it was like completely doing anything Trump wanted. Yeah,
of course.
It's not going to be good regardless, to be honest. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, I really don't think, especially with I don't know, man. I feel like I don't think Biden has the juice for.
I think there's a chance he'll pull it out again. He pulled it out once, but it's hard to say. Yeah, but I feel pretty confident in saying that Trump will be the Republican nominee.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you're betting, folks,
that's our bet.
Bet on Trump.
Yeah.
We 100% endorse. Is that what we're saying?
I wouldn't say we endorse. I'm saying he will be the Republican.
Okay.
He will be the Republican candidate. That's our prediction.
Endorsements to come at a later time, and they will cost money. So any presidential candidates looking for the official Dr. Professor Floating Alley.
Yes.
Endorsement, Professor of Islamic Studies at University of Pittsburgh.
Let's not put my professional title in this.
Okay. All right. The other thing, another entrant into the presidential race is Cornel West.
I know.
Did you see that?
I did.
With the People's Party. What are your thoughts?
Someone who I admire on Twitter, Asad Dania, I think is his name, I think put it in a way that I agreed with. Just that there's been a lot of progressive organizing, and this seems like mostly a symbolic move. And that Cornel hasn't been that. He's been involved in a lot of really important work, obviously, but he hasn't been involved in that much like political building in the last 3 years.
Yeah.
And so it seems like kind of a strange move.
What do you mean in terms of political building, though?
Like
he's been around.
Yeah, no, he definitely has for years and years, obviously. But that I don't know. I guess I'd have to look into it more. I admire Cornel West a lot, obviously, but that he hasn't been doing that much on the groundwork with like particularly like socialist groups or anything like that in the last couple of years, which could be wrong. I mean, I should look into it for myself. True. Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he's been on like lecture and interview circuits talking about a lot of like progressive causes, and I think I think this is obviously he's not going to win. Right. But I think it's a good play because he's someone with name recognition. He's very good in interviews. He's excellent in debates.
He's a great speaker.
He's a great speaker. And he's doing it as a third party, which is the People's Party, which is, I guess, was started by a former Bernie Sanders staffer.
I don't know anything about the People's Party. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know much. All I know is that, it was started by a Bernie Sanders staffer after the 2016 campaign, and they tried to get Bernie to move over to that party instead of running again as a Democrat.
Right, and he ran as Dem. Yeah.
And he continued to run again as a Democrat. And I think a lot of people have the very valid critique of saying you're not going to get anything done if you're running within the Democratic Party and if you're beholden to Democratic Party backers.
I definitely think that the two-party system is very broken, and it would be helpful to have a third party.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think if you get someone like that, I mean, I guess getting the ball rolling essentially, or if he can get on a debate stage
maybe that'd
with
be cool.
a Democrat,
That's a
if he
good
gets on a
point.
debate stage with
Could
Joe
be an interesting
Biden,
conversation. Yeah, that's true.
that would be incredible.
Yeah. I have to think about it more, honestly. I don't have a fully formed thought about it yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm interested to hear, to see what he does kind of in the media and where he'll go. Even if he ends up, right now the Democratic campaign is, or sorry, not the Democratic, the kind of left presidential candidates are him, Marianne Williamson,
Who I don't love.
Jr.
I do feel like if someone was going to run third party, I wish it was someone who had already started organizing and who wasn't just running to kind of add to the conversation, like someone who actively had campaign people in like Iowa and other states.
Mm-hmm.
I guess actually
I mean, that's what Bernie Sanders should have done.
Right,
like
but
a
I'm
huge
saying
miss.
I've kind of wished that instead of Cornel West, who I think is just doing it for the conversation, which is valuable, but I kind of wish it was someone who was more, who had been starting to like lay the groundwork already with organizing. Like I wish it was an actual viable third party candidate. I don't think it's enough to have ground recognition. Sorry. I don't know.
The Democratic Party has gotten in the way of that being built.
But I don't think that's why Cornel West hasn't been organizing. I think that this is a little bit of like
this is the chance
creating
to
a conversation. Yeah, but the organizing should come first. Like it should have been someone like a Bernie, I think, who's, if they were going to be a third party candidate, who already had on the ground campaigns.
Yeah, I mean, I think Bernie for sure would have been the guy to do this, and it's a big failure, I think, on his part that he didn't go independent for his second run. But I also think this is a really valid approach, and no one else is trying to do anything, so why not Cornel West?
Yeah.
I think he's going to lend a lot of credibility to this party, and hopefully it can become something more.
It'll definitely be interesting. I really regret not taking a class with him while I was at Harvard Divinity. I know friends who did really enjoyed his class.
Mm-hmm.
He had some phrases that he repeated so often, though he was an excellent speaker, that people
Mm-hmm.
would make like bingo boards. It's
Yeah.
really cute for like Brother Bernie or whatever, and they would like check it off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it'll be interesting to follow those developments.
Definitely.
That's it. That's all I got.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. We're going to be talking about Exit West. I think I'll start with a little bit of an introduction, and then I've got some stuff that we can talk about, but I also am just excited to hear your general thoughts, and if you want to insert at any point, obviously you should do that.
So, yeah, I did not read the book.
Yes.
I listened to it
You
on
audiobooked
audiobook
it.
at 1.8 times speed.
Which you said worked pretty well, right?
Yeah, it worked great. A lot of people who do listen to audiobooks, they play a little fast and loose with the word read.
Uh-huh. I think it counts.
I don't think so. I think it's stealing reading valor.
I don't think so. I think that if you still absorb the story that way, I mean, it depends on what you're trying to get out of it, but I think if it makes
cheating.
I
think deep down people know it.
I think if it is between that and not reading, certainly, then you should totally do audiobooks.
I'm not saying audiobooks are bad. I'm just saying you use a different verb.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's fair.
Do you read a podcast?
No. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I honestly haven't really listened to audiobooks, so I don't
An
have
audiobook
like
is just a podcast.
That's fair. That's fair.
It's just listening.
Well, with that caveat, we'll go into it.
So I listened to it.
He listened to it.
I'm an honest man. I'm the only honest man in the game. Everyone else would have said they read it at 1.8 times speed.
As you reading it.
Nah.
So this book is by Mohisin Hamid, who's a British Pakistani novelist. He was born in the U.S., raised in Pakistan, and then went to the U.S. for college. He studied international relations while he was at Princeton. And then he took a class with Toni Morrison, which apparently was really life-changing.
Wow.
And kind of cool overlap there. His first book that he became really well known for was called Moth Smoke, which I have not read. I have read his other big novel called Reluctant Fundamentalist. It was like the edgy thing to read in college because the premise of that is like this guy is a terrorist, and by the end of the book you kind of sympathize with him.
Nice.
This book that we're talking about today, Exit West, first came out in 2017, and I read it in 2018. So this is my second time rereading it, and I found it very moving on my first read. I really loved it. And it's actually going to be the Badal, which is an arts collective that I run with my friend Wad in the area. It's going to be our next book club book, so it was fun to get to revisit it. And it's a novel about refugees and migration, but it's written in a style of genre called magical realism, which is one of my favorite genres. I love magical realism. Magical realism and like historical fiction are my favorite fiction genres.
Yeah.
I think especially I love magical realism because it's real life, but then there's this kind of like shimmery aspect to it that allows you to explore things in kind of more poetic detail.
Yeah.
But they're just as real in terms of like the themes that are being explored. And so for this book, which is about migration, the kind of, conceit is that doors are opening up all around the world.
Yeah.
And people are rushing them. And so there are some doors that are opening to places that no one wants to go, and those doors are not being rushed, but particularly people who are stuck in war zones, who are stuck in places with intense conflict, are rushing doors to Europe, are rushing doors to the United States, and to other places around the world in order to find safety. So that's kind of like the basic premise of the book. Before we dive into it, what was your overall impression? Did you enjoy it? I don't think this is a genre that you read that often, so I was curious to kind of hear your thoughts.
I think parts of it were sweet. I think he did a good job capturing the evolution of, or the progression and kind of deterioration of a relationship.
I was wondering if you would kind of
crisis.
Yeah.
And I think I found a lot of things very relatable about kind of the end of a relationship, but I think he did a good job with that. The beginning of it, when I was listening to it, I found it a little bit hard to get into just because I didn't really love his style of writing. It's and I think a lot of writers do this, and I might not do a great job of explaining it, but it's just like hammering a little too hard on or juxtaposing contradictory words and just kind of being like, it all felt empty but full. You know what I'm saying? Like something.
Yeah, that's a good description. I actually really like that, but I can see why that wouldn't be everyone's jam.
Yeah. It was just a little bit too much of that, and I was just like, okay, whatever.
I'm glad to hear that you kind of got more into it with time, though, because I think the story itself was compelling. Yeah,
I think there were some things that were compelling. I think, like I said, I think he did a very good job of portraying this couple and their relationship. My other thought, and it was. This is kind of like the Dean coin idea a little bit.
In terms of what? Like taking something from real life and really kind of exaggerating it?
Well, just in the same kind of, I feel like the worlds that we painted, if I had, obviously this is like an actual book that won prizes and stuff, but the idea that there's this dystopia where you have all these migrants who are going to places, and then they're there working, because I think toward the end you kind of learn that a lot of these migrants are just like living in these like shanty towns, and they're taking on several jobs or working overtime, so they're doing all this hard work, but their work is never going to be paid or worth as much as the people who were natively there or whatever, which is kind of like, the Dean coin idea that like your prayers, you can pray all, but because whatever, there's like a forced or like created or instituted like strata of
I had that thought too, actually, but in a different way, with the comparison to Dean coin, in that, also shout out if you haven't watched the Techno Jahannam episode or listened to it, you should. That is like a dystopia, but the reason why it's funny and kind of feels poignant, at least to me, is that unfortunately it's not that far from reality. I think that's the same with this book, right? Like Saudi is a dystopia for migrants, And so I feel like this book with people rushing doors, like, there aren't literally doors around the world, but there are, migration routes that people die on every day trying to like get out of their situation. Yeah, so I'm going to start off by just kind of reading the very first page, a little bit of it, to introduce folks to the main characters. Obviously, this contains a lot of spoilers. I do think that you would still get something out of reading the book after listening to this episode, but just something to kind of keep in mind. So I'm just going to read. I won't be reading as much for future portions, but just to kind of start us off, this is the very first page. In a city swollen by refugees, but still mostly at peace, or at least not yet openly at war, a young man met a young woman in a classroom and did not speak to her for many days. His name was Saeed and her name was Nadia, and he had a beard, not a full beard, more studiously maintained stubble, and she was always clad from the tips of her toes to the bottom of her jugular notch in a flowing black robe. Back then, people continued to enjoy the luxury of wearing more or less what they wanted to wear, clothing and hair-wise, within certain bounds, of course, and so these choices meant something. It might seem odd that in cities teetering at the edge of the abyss, young people still go to class, in this case an evening class on corporate identity and product branding. But that is the way of things with cities as with life. For one moment we are pottering about our errands as usual, and the next we are dying. And our eternally impending ending does not put a stop to our transient beginnings and middles until the instant when it does. So a couple things I wanted to kind of point to this. One thing I love about this book that I think is a really interesting device is some things are hyper specific and some are intentionally really general. And so we never learn the country that Nadia and Saeed are from. And there was actually some criticism of the book for that. Some people were like, oh, this is just like a generic Arab country. I mean, for a lot of people, they kind of saw Syria
like
in this. What?
It's like Aladdin.
It's like Aladdin, yeah. It's like a woman who wears, you know, a burqa to be safe, even though she's not practicing. And like they found the characters a bit problematically generic. But I actually thought there was something really beautiful about the universality. And there's plenty of other specifics about the group or about other characters throughout the book. I kind of like that these were like an everyman, like a John Doe, Jane Doe. How did you feel about that framing?
I thought it was fine. I didn't really think too much about it, to be honest.
Yeah.
I didn't think the book was lacking because it didn't say whether or not he was Syrian or she was whatever.
They were in Iraq or yeah.
Yeah. I don't think that was the point.
Yeah, that's fair. I also love this part about like you go first.
I really do like that passage that you read though, just because again, I think everyone now has the experience of having lived through like a world crisis and the ways that it feels like a lot of things are ending or changing or catastrophes just like ensuing around you, but then you still have to kind of go around about your everyday life and sit on a Zoom meeting and talk about, you know, client deliverables or a bunch of bullshit that you know truly doesn't matter.
Absolutely. I completely had the same thought. I felt like this hit really differently after having lived through COVID. Not at all to say that that is the same experience, obviously. Like I was very comfortable during COVID.
Yeah.
As
this
someone
was also written in 2017, right? Before COVID, yes.
Right. But reading it after COVID and thinking about going through a time where it feels kind of like apocalyptic and like the world was maybe kind of ending in some way and a new world was being born, though honestly that didn't fully happen. I remember even like us going on dates and like, you know, during COVID and then being like, like it was during like the Black Lives Matters protests and there was curfews and just like all this surreal stuff was happening. Yeah. But also like we were still kind of progressing with our lives at the same time. Yeah. And so I really appreciated that kind of like, it seems improbable that people would be getting coffee and going to class and like having crushes as there's kind of like this specter of war hanging overhead. And it's also the kind of reminder of like, I don't think that things really go south until they go south. Like people just keep on living, you know?
Yeah. Which is good and bad, right? Like you do, part of you is just like, why can't we all just collectively take a step back and take this moment to assess what matters and what doesn't? Because it's a really good time to do it, but it's just a missed opportunity.
I think some of that happened a little bit on a personal level. Like apparently a lot of people, statistically, more people sort of had realizations about, for example, their gender identity because they had more time to think and be alone. And, you know, people realized that they didn't want to commute an hour to work. So there were some micro things, but on a societal level, certainly wish more had happened.
Yeah. Like, you know, there was a time when people, you know, I would go outside all the time and ride my bike and find so many people by like on the Greenway or by the lake where I lived. And this was just during the day.
Right.
Midday.
Right. People were really outdoors, which was nice.
Which previously would have just been during work hours. And I was like, this is what people should be doing. Like we should have, you know, decades ago, people predicted by now we'd have like a 3-day work week.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I remember my roommates and I at the time, like discovered all these parks by our house that we never knew existed because we were just so desperate to get outside. And there was something really beautiful about looking at nature and being like, oh, this will all be here, even though it feels like everything's crazy right now.
Right.
Yeah.
But like you said, that definitely wasn't everyone's experience.
Right. Definitely not. Other thing, kind of just in terms of like device that I wanted to draw attention to on page 34, if you happen to have a copy of the book, there's this kind of last scene where Nadia had another lover before she met Saeed, and she's saying goodbye to that lover, and they have sex for the last time. But this is kind of, the narrator says that like this lover is actually going to die in a month because the militants will kill him.
Yeah.
And Nadia doesn't know that. And so I think it's an interesting way that the narrator is kind of like omniscient. What's that word? Omniscient. I can never say that, which I kind of like. It's sort of an interesting kind of zooming in and zooming out. Like even though we're following these two main characters, we kind of get other people's ends of their stories that the characters themselves could not know, which is kind of nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the last thing I kind of want to point to before we get...
She doesn't know, but something about how they might have known or something like that, right?
I think so. Yeah. Or it says here, I think, later in life, she would sometimes wonder what became of him and she would never know. Yeah, that he had died like shortly after that. And then the other thing to kind of note just before we get into some more themes in terms of style is that a number of vignettes are kind of sprinkled throughout about how the doors are impacting other people that are not at all related to Nadia and Saeed in other parts of the world.
Okay, that's what was going on.
Yeah.
I was just like, who are these people?
No, not in that example.
That's what happens when you listen at 1.8.
Not in that example.
Not in that one.
That's what was happening in the book. Was that like hard to understand in audio form? Because in the book it's like kind of spaced out.
Yeah. I'd just be like, who is this person?
Got it. Oh, that's funny. Actually, I remember the first time reading it, the first two, I was like, what's happening? But then you kind of, as you're reading, you kind of just get a rhythm for it, I think. Yeah. So this is kind of like larger perspective on like how is this impacting other people throughout the world. And I really appreciate the nuance of those stories. They take different directions. So I just kind of pulled a couple. There's one where these Filipino migrants are appearing in Japan, and you have this kind of implication that this man is like really anti-Filipino, is going to cause some violence. He goes after some of them with a knife. There's another one about this man, I think in England, who's really depressed and thinking about taking his life, and he goes through a door and like finds a whole new life in Nambia. And then there's one really sweet one, I think my favorite one, about these two older men who fall in love. I think one guy is in Brazil and one is maybe in Italy, and they kind of find the doors and they don't speak the same language, but they just kind of show each other their paintings and they like completely fall in love and start a relationship. So kind of this idea of like, what does it mean to move throughout space, not just for like refugees of war, but like what would it mean if everyone had kind of more free movement throughout the world? Yeah.
I think about that a lot, about what if we had a system that made it just easier for people to move about the world and settle in different places or travel. And I wonder what the implication of that would be for certain like regional cultures, or would things become more homogenous or what? But I mean, so this book kind of plays with that idea because, it makes it so that even travel in this world though isn't without risk.
Absolutely.
Right? So
You've heard me go on this rant so many times, so I'm like hesitant to do it again, but I feel like the root cause of so much evil in this world is like nation states. And this exercise that we did with students in the big Intro to Islam class at UNC that I always found so profound, we would talk about Ibn Battuta, who is this traveler who went all around the world, who is from what is now Tunisia. We would talk about, and kind of roughly in what we consider the medieval era, he went all around the world, and we'd like kind of map out his travels throughout the class. And then we'd ask students, like, what would be different about taking this journey today? And at first they would come up with lots of really great, obvious things like, hey, we can take a plane, we would have access to better medicine. We could look up stuff ahead of time. But then finally, someone would finally kind of come to the point of like, oh, like you would have to apply for like 1 million fucking visas. Yeah. Like depending on like where you are in the world, like this trip could be almost impossible. And I feel like, that's like a real thing in terms of like people's ability to move throughout space.
Yeah.
Yeah. So first theme that I thought we could kind of talk about is the kind of most obvious one, like migration, just how the characters kind of move throughout the book. So first Nadia and Saeed strike up a romance, and then as war increases in their city, they get closer and closer. Saeed's mother is killed just by kind of like incidental fire, not intentionally, which in some ways makes it sort of more tragic.
Yeah.
And then Nadia ends up moving in with Saeed and her father. Nadia and Saeed pay a smuggler to take them to a door that's opened up, but the father kind of insists on not going.
Yep.
And I was going to read a little bit of that out loud.
Yep.
I'll pull it up here. I really liked the father and Nadia's relationship, like how naturally they became kind of father and daughter. Yeah. And so, you know, at first, the reason that Saeed's father gives is that the mother is still present for him. You know, she's died, but like the city is, her presence is all over the city for him, and he wants to be able to visit her grave, and he doesn't want to kind of pick up and leave. But then this underlying thing that he doesn't say out loud is he doesn't want like an old man to be holding them back from their path. Yeah. He wants them to be able to flee properly, and he knows that he'll kind of naturally hold them back.
Yeah.
And he takes Nadia aside, and he kind of makes her promise that she'll stay by Saeed's side until he's out of danger. And then they have this kind of thing where they say, like, we'll come back, we'll visit you, but they all understand that it's not true, that they're not going to see him again. And the last line here, a line that's often quoted from this book, is, they could not protect him, so Saeed's father, as Saeed and Nadia could, his other relatives. And so by making the promise he demanded she was in a sense killing him, but that is the way of things. For when we migrate, we murder from our lives those who we leave behind. Which is like a bit of a heavy-handed line, but I think it is a beautiful one. And that's so true. Like, I think there's so much emphasis on how migration is for migrants, but also like it means a lot, I think, for the people who are left behind.
Yeah.
Yeah, for like the families. Yeah. I mean, even thinking about like how families like lose touch and stuff. Yeah. I grew up hearing a story from my grandparents on my mom's side. My great-grandparents came from Sweden in the 1920s, so like a while ago. But during the Depression, apparently, I don't know much about Sweden and its history, but Sweden was going through an even worse like economic depression at the time. Like people were very, very poor. And out of that came like a really great socialist system as a response to that, which is kind of awesome. I wish that we had also developed those kind of safety nets. But at the time, things were really bad, which is why like my great-grandparents migrated. And there were stories of like people in the US sending back like coffee to Sweden, and people like opening their packages and like sitting and smelling the coffee and being like so excited to have coffee. And there was this huge generation where like everyone left like a family, and there was a lot of mythologizing about like what life was like in the US. And yeah, there's like a lot of ties that are sort of created through that, which is interesting.
Yeah.
So initially the characters they rush a door or they pay a smuggler, and they end up in Mykonos in Greece, which I didn't have a ton to say about that. I was going to kind of talk more about the community they built in London after that, because that was really interesting. Did you have anything to say about the Greece portion?
No.
Okay, cool. So in London, I've got a couple of things to kind of pull up. So they go to Mykonos, but then they're kind of stuck on this island and it's not sustainable. And then Nadia becomes friends with a local who's helping the migrants. And there's a little bit of an implication that develops later on in the story that she's also attracted to this woman who helps her escape. And then she ends up in London. So they end up in London, and I couldn't really tell, and I think it's supposed to be somewhat ambiguous, but it seems like they step through a door in like a hotel or something, right? Like some sort of big house that can house a lot of people. That's very comfortable. And not only do they end up there, but a lot of other people from around the world end up in this hotel. And it kind of becomes a bit of a commune model where people are sort of voting and making collective decisions on how to survive for as long as possible in the hotel. And so a couple of lovely quotes. A sort of camaraderie evolved, as it might not have had they been on the street in the open, for then they would have scattered and the devil take the hindmost. But here they were penned in together, and being penned in made them a group. And again, with this kind of like specificity and then really kind of general description. There's some really general descriptions of protests that are happening, but a lot of protesters essentially are coming also in support of the migrants. The migrants can like look out the window and they see that some of those people look like them and maybe are descended from like places in the world that they came from.
Yeah.
And it's here that I think we start to see some really interesting contrasts between the characters. So Nadia is like thrilled to be in this house with people from all around the world. She's really enjoying it. And Saeed feels kind of uncomfortable and a little outnumbered. With time, it seems like there's more Nigerians in the house, and we don't know Nadia and Saeed's exact background, but it seems like they're Arab of some sort. And I thought it was really nicely played out, because it's not like necessarily that Saeed is prejudiced. He just seems to have this instinctual desire to be with like his countrymen, and he feels sort of penned in and just sort of like lost without kind of the moorings of home and recreating. And I feel like this kind of highlights two responses that people can take to new environments, whether through migration or through like more everyday examples of kind of retreating into yourself or sort of going all in. Yeah.
Is this when he starts to kind of become a little more conservative and
more religious? Exactly. So on the next page it says, in the morning they heard in the distance someone make a call to prayer at dawn, perhaps over a commandeered karaoke machine. And Nadia was alarmed, waking from her dream and thinking for a second that she was back home in her own city with the militants. before recalling where she really was, and then she watched, a little bit surprised, as Saeed got out of bed and prayed.
Yeah.
So it's the first time that Saeed kind of prays. After his mother's death, he prays, but the first time after that. And then he becomes quite devout. Like, he finds a lot of hope in prayer in a way that Nadia doesn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, I think that explains very well. Like, a lot of people come here and have a very easy time assimilating, quote, right? And really just going in. And then a lot of people have this, they feel like they just like really need to cling at all costs to a semblance of where they came from. And I think for a lot of people that takes on the form of spiritual acts or deeds. Sorry, I'm turning up my volume. I think I've been low. But what was I gonna say?
While you're thinking, that's definitely been true for my dad's family. A lot of people who immigrated, not my dad, but a lot of people in my dad's family who immigrated from Pakistan became a lot more practicing in the U.S. than they were in Pakistan. And it's hard to say if that's like age, because obviously they were like in their 20s when they came here, and now they're like, in their 50s. But like significantly more so.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. Like a lot of, I hope no one's listening to this, but it's not a bad thing. It's just an interesting thing with change in time. I know a lot of like my family members used to drink and don't anymore, for example. Do you think of what you were?
No.
Oh, of course. No, don't feel bad. I just had this kind of point here where like Saeed's trying to get Nadia to move to an encampment in London of people from their own country, and Nadia says they're from the country we used to be from.
Mm-hmm.
Like she kind of doesn't feel that same kind of ongoing identification that he does. Increasingly the further away they get from home. And then thought that this was really lovely. Nadia kind of noticed that in the nativists who are advocating for like slaughter of the migrants, she sees like the fury of the militants in her own city, like, just the kind of commonalities between types of extremism. But she feels also excited to be kind of in a new environment, to be kind of challenged by that environment. And so they're in London for a while. And then ultimately they're able to kind of stake a claim there, and there's this kind of like detente that's reached, and basically the migrants are kind of put into camps to build housing for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that this was such a sweet description. So for a lot of the migrants, the only kind of close contact they have with someone who's quote unquote native, which we can probably understand that to mean like white British English, is the foreman that they work with. And I thought this was a lovely description. For Saeed and for many others on the team, their contact with the foreman was the closest and most extended of their contacts with any native. And so they looked at him as though he was the key to understanding their new home. Its people and manners and ways and habits, which in a sense he was, though of course their very presence here meant that its peoples and manners and ways and habits were undergoing considerable change. And I feel like it's just like a lovely human thing that even when you tried not to do is so instinctual. Like when you're in a new place and you meet a taxi driver and you're like, okay, let me understand this cultural context of this one person.
Yeah.
Because that's just the closest that you come with that kind of group of people.
Yeah.
And I thought that was such a sweet way of describing that, because I feel like I've seen that play out so often where someone is like, and I think it comes from a good place. It can kind of come off as sort of like stereotyping or being a little simplistic.
Yeah.
But I think it does come from a good place to be like, oh, like this is how you do things. Like, is this the American way of doing things? Or, this kind of foreman being the only person that people have met outside of television or media that's kind of connecting them to England.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We do that a lot in our lives.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I feel like in spite of like, thinking a lot about nuance and stuff, I totally do that when I travel. You like meet someone in like a really basic exchange kind of relationship and you're like, oh, this is great, like I have insight into this group of people or into this place, and that's partially true, but it's also just like one person's take or one person's experience.
I mean, I think it's natural to kind of like try to look for patterns or
Yeah.
combinations of those, and I don't think anyone can be faulted for not immediately being able to have a scientific sample size of a population.
The only place where it goes too far, call out to anthropologists, is like when you read an ethnography and like every other paragraph is like, and as my taxi driver said, and it's like, did you only talk to taxi drivers in this country?
Sure.
Like,
yeah, maybe in an academic context
Yeah.
where you're purporting to have like a broad knowledge and you're passing it off as like a kind of universal truth or whatever, that can get a little shady. But I think I never felt, because I think I was that person for a lot of people in my life,
Really?
Especially growing up. Yeah, because I was the like only Egyptian kid in my high school, right?
Yeah.
And it never really bothered me when people would ask questions about, being Muslim or being Egyptian or whatever. And then as I got older in college and stuff, I think I found people apologizing on other people's behalf for asking questions about like, oh, how do you say your name or stuff like that, or asking kind of like very innocuous questions.
Yeah.
I'm like, I really don't. It doesn't bother me. I don't understand why you're annoyed on my behalf.
I think you and I have a very similar take on this. I think it's totally okay to ask questions. We all need spaces to ask questions that we don't know the answers to. And I think that a nice thing about real life as opposed to the internet is you actually can really tell someone's intent like 90% of the time.
For sure.
Like someone can ask a question that like if they were to type it out might seem offensive, but if you know that they're a decent person and they're just curious, then it doesn't come off that way, you know?
There's a difference between, oh, where are you from? And where the fuck are you from?
Right, exactly. And that difference is lost sometimes
hell are you?
Behind a keyboard, but in real life it's not that hard to tell, I think. Yeah.
That's the one that really bothers people is
where are you from?
Or what are you?
That's also complicated. There's been so much online discourse about that. I personally am not bothered by people asking where I'm from.
Yeah.
I think, I guess there is the whole, which has been so overdone in like a million lines of diaspora poetry, but you say like, I'm from New York, and then they say, where are you really from? Yeah. But to be honest, I get the where are you really from more often from people who aren't white, who are trying to figure out like if I was born in the country. And that's just like, I think I was born in the country, but I think it's just kind of like a desire to kind of create connection or to see if we have a shared experience. I don't think it's a bad thing. They're not saying you're not really American. They're just like, oh, like,
I love diaspora poetry.
Yeah.
I'm from where turmeric stains the tablecloth
meets
and
mango.
Mangoes pile high.
I love a lot of diaspora
on
poetry,
rickshaws and truckloads.
It has gotten to the point of caricature. It's a little the mango metaphors are a lot. What's like the Egyptian equivalent to like mango metaphors?
By the way, Egyptians have mangoes.
They're probably not that good though.
They're as good, if not better.
I doubt it. You haven't had like a proper Pakistani mango yet.
Have you had a proper Egyptian mango?
No, but there's so many like varieties of mangoes in Pakistan.
That's true. I'm not ready with the facts. I feel like you just found this out.
I did actually. I didn't even know
You're
that.
passing this off.
You're so right. Our neighbors just taught us that.
Yeah, you just found out.
Called out.
She's about to say there are 76 varieties of mango.
I did not remember the number. I'm not going to lie. I did not even remember the number, but damn, was it that high?
Yeah, it was a lot.
That's crazy. I also, if anyone has the Pakistani mango WhatsApp connect, I've been trying. I haven't been trying that hard, but I want it.
What's up like my parents.
Well, how do you say it?
It's WhatsApp.
Oh.
It's a P.
I'm like a native English speaker. I was born here. I do have some weird
idiosyncrasies. And then you're like, hey, talk to me on WhatsApp.
I have some like
Ahmed, Habibi, send me a message on WhatsApp.
I have some idiosyncrasies in my speech that Ahmed says reminds him of his mom, but there's like no logical explanation for that.
انت تعرف فين اقدر اجيب المانجا من واتساب يا ولا.
Anyway, I want the WhatsApp mango connect. I want to order some like beautiful Pakistani mangoes. So if you have that, if you could let me know, I'd really appreciate it.
Yeah, actually we should try to do that.
Oh man, I lost the thread.
Sorry, that's totally my fault.
No, it's not your fault. Migration. Okay. After London, things are going pretty well, but essentially their relationship is kind of struggling. And so they jump another door and they go to California.
Yeah. I think, I don't know if this is when it happens, but I remember there being a description about how, sorry, I got a computer going to sleep. I remember there being a description about how she realized, saw a change in him when he was sad or anxious or feeling like that. He would be anxious and she could tell that he's sad. In the past, she'd be like, oh, he's sad, but there's still like a sweetness to him. He would, try to smile at her or whatever. And then that changed to her still seeing that sadness, but knowing that there's like a bitterness to him now that he was actually changing.
Yeah.
And that,
I have some more quotes like later on about their relationship and how they tracked it. Because I also agree. I thought it was such a beautiful kind of portrait of a relationship changing with time.
Yeah.
And just like honestly, some of my biggest fears like that you just kind of start taking for granted this person or that you're like it's hard, but like really lovely to see spelled out in that way.
Yeah. I think it really shows. I think it's realistic too. That's the thing. It's like a very realistic portrayal of how people fall in and out of love.
Absolutely.
It takes a lot of work to love someone. Like it's
It
not an
does.
effortless thing.
I feel like that's a kind of taboo thing to say, but I totally agree with you. I do feel like you have to be intentional in order to stay in love. I don't think it just happens without action.
There's no
Yeah.
I really don't think there's a perfect person out there who will just.
That's something I've learned during our first year of marriage, honestly. I think I used to have this kind of naive idea that once you would fall in love, you would always be that in love. And I think
you could always be just like madly in love.
Right. And I think that's true to an extent that like obviously like hopefully you kind of picked a partner that like you could grow with but I think that there is a level of intentionality and that's not a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of used to think if you put any effort into it, like, you know, maybe it just wasn't supposed to be that way.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm like, no, like it's okay to put some effort into it. Or like, you know, effort doesn't have to be negative. It could be like a beautiful thing. Like, oh, I'm choosing to like learn who this person is today.
Yeah. I think there is beauty in that.
Yeah. I think also it's realistic in that for these two particular characters, they just happened to grow in different directions that weren't compatible. And that can also be something that happens, you know, like he just became more religious and he wanted a community that looked similar to where they came from.
He could have become more religious and she could have been supportive of that. It's not like he was trying to force her to be more
absolutely.
religious.
But I think that they just there were people out there who were more suitable for them and they ended up with partners who kind of fit that, you know.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I think that's a valid choice. I'm not saying it's a bad one or that they're less moral characters or virtuous characters for that.
I know you're not.
But they also could have continued to choose each other if they wanted to, right? But they went for what they felt was probably a more easy option given their lives.
Yeah, I also struggle with that because I personally feel like you should end up with someone that you choose fully, not just out of convenience. Like, I think that's a terrible reason to choose a partner.
Yeah.
Personally. Yeah.
But that's what they were doing.
Yeah.
Is going and choosing other people out of convenience.
I don't think it was just out of convenience. I think it was also out of compatibility. Different reads. Yeah. I actually have a lot of quotes kind of about the relationship part, but I'm going to just finish up with the migration.
Mm-hmm.
So they end up in the city outside of San Francisco. And it's kind of like a beautiful vision of like a really kind of combined place. It was actually almost a little bit stereotypical, I thought, like melting pot. It almost veered into that category because there's people from like all around the world in this city and like there's no one who's really from there. And so they're able to kind of create new community. It's not like a perfect representation. I mean, he shows like some nuance and some complications. At one point Nadia is working and someone comes in and puts a gun down on the counter. So that was a very like little American shout out.
Well, this city's off the coast of the US, right?
It's right outside of San Francisco. Yeah. But there's a lot of kind of imagery of like this sense of hope because it's like on the ocean and because it's so beautiful. Yeah. Let's maybe go into the stuff about their relationship because I think we already kind of started that conversation. I had one quote that I thought was really sweet, that the end of the world can be cozy at times. Like when they first get together, there's a sense of kind of them against the world because they're meeting in this time of tumultuousness.
Yeah.
Even as their relationship is changing before they kind of fully fall apart, I thought there were some beautiful descriptions of the kind of little micro fights that couples have. So there's at one point where, you know, they appear in London and they appear in this hotel and she takes a bath and he sees her and says, "You can't stand there like that." And she says, "Don't tell me what I can do." And it says, he looks stung by this comment and also angry, and she was angry as well. And after he had bathed and washed his clothes, which he did perhaps as a conciliatory gesture, or perhaps because once he was cleansed of his own grime, he too realized something of what she had realized. They slept on the slender single bed together without speaking, without touching, or without touching more than the cramped space demanded. For this one night, not unlike a couple that was long and unhappily married, a couple that made out of opportunities for joy, misery. But I love that like description of them like not touching because I feel like there's so much about touch that is so like charged and just kind of like, I don't know, the little micro thing about the way that she's holding her towel and like their little body language. I thought that was really beautifully described. And there's a lot of parts like that throughout the book that get into kind of like, even without much dialogue, the kind of like interactions that couples can have. Yeah. Let's see. Some of these we might not need to read. I'm going to quickly check. I love this quote about them leaving London for San Francisco. Every time a couple moves, they begin, if their attention is still drawn to one another, to see each other differently. For personalities are not a single immutable color, like white or blue, but rather illuminated screens, and the shades we reflect depend much on what is around us. And I really love that, because I feel like, I guess I was thinking about us moving, and I feel like I like that idea of like, people always will say like, oh, when you move, you take your problems with you. And that's totally true. But there is also, that can be true. And there is a sense of kind of freshness that comes when you first move that I find really invigorating. It's kind of like traveling, right? Like initially you kind of feel a little jolted. And there's kind of like that idea that like we like to think of ourselves as stable, but ultimately we are at least partially a product of, we have agency in this, but we are a product of our daily routines and of the people we surround ourselves with, and also of where we live and like our very direct circumstances. And so kind of just people taking on different shades in different places I thought was interesting. Yeah. Like even when we visit New York, I always kind of feel like a different bustle to us, or when we visit Boston, you know, versus what our life looks like here.
Yeah, I pretend to be a totally different guy.
What do you do?
Gambling addict.
You're a gambling addict in New York or Boston?
New York.
Who are you in Boston?
Doctor.
A doctor?
Yeah.
That makes sense. It's very Cambridge of you.
Yeah, I fit in. I have a lot of doctor friends up there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Lots of patients too.
This is a quote that I think kind of speaks to that shift that you were talking about. Saeed made it a point to smile with Nadia, at least sometimes, and he hoped she would feel something warm and caring when he smiled. But what she felt was sorrow and the sense that they were better than this and that together they had to find a way out. So the kind of sense of like a relationship fading. And ultimately they decide to call it. He's really drawn in San Francisco to this preacher's daughter who is, the preacher is African-American imam, and his wife, who's since passed, was from like Saeed's country, which again, we don't know what the country is. And so he shares like some background with this daughter and they're drawn together. And then Nadia ends up in a relationship with this woman who's a cook where she works. And so they kind of move on to different relationships. I was just going to read a little bit of the very end of the book for this kind of section on relationships because I think it's really sweet. They kind of meet up together half a century later. And so they're probably like, what, in their 50s now? They were like in their 20s, you know, late 40s or late 50s. What?
They'd be 70.
Well, I think they were in their 20s when the book started. So if it's half a century later, it's 25 years later.
Half a century.
Yeah. So they're probably like 45, 50.
Half a century's 50 years.
Oh, shit. You're totally right. Oh, so they're old.
Yeah.
Damn, I messed that up.
Uh-huh.
A century is 100 years. Good job.
Yeah.
So they're like, yeah, they're in their 70s. They're old. And it's also kind of a beautiful portrait of the city. So they're in the city of their birth. And the city is like rebuilt itself. And people there don't remember the horrors that they witnessed that made them flee, you know?
Yeah.
Which I'm sure is a bizarre experience that people around the world have, and going back to places they had to flee because of conflict.
Yeah.
And they meet for coffee and they have like a sweet conversation about kind of like what could have happened and what did happen. And at the end, they finish their coffees and Nadia asks if Saeed had been to the deserts of Chile where he wanted to go. And he says no. And, you know, I'll let you know if I go, or like we should go together kind of thing. And it's just like a really sweet, I thought, way. I like that they didn't completely dissolve into bitterness, that they still held like respect for the role that they had played in each other's lives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's sweet. That's how it ends, right? Or
that's the end of the book
with them? They go like several weeks and then months and whatever.
No, that was before that.
That was before.
Yeah, but that was also a
really
good passage. I can see if I can find it, but basically it's something about how like initially they chicken on each other and then they kind of become more and more confident the other can survive without them, that they're happy in their new lives, and they don't really like seeing that, even though they're glad that they're going to be okay. And then like eventually it's like a lifetime that they don't talk. First it's weeks, then it's months, and then it's, you know, a whole lifetime. Yeah.
This is a good breakup novel.
It is, yeah. Little known, not just a migration novel, but also a breakup novel.
That's true. Yeah.
It's true though. You're right. Yeah, it's definitely true. I want to talk a little bit about Nadia's sexuality. I really appreciated how I felt like that was done with a very light hand. Like it wasn't like hitting you over the head with like, oh, she's bisexual, she's attracted to women. You kind of become aware of it as the character becomes aware of it. Like there's kind of, she really likes this woman in Greece, but it also seems at the time like she's just trying to get out of Greece and this woman's agreeing to help them. And then later on, not really so much in London, but when they're in San Francisco, there's kind of like an intimation that she's masturbating thinking about this woman, and she's no longer surprised by the strength of her response. And then she gets close to the cook, and then suddenly it's like, and she made love with the cook. But there's not like I don't know, I like that there wasn't like two sentences that are like, and then she realized. It just kind of like happens with time, which I think is more realistic. I think that sometimes we like later on have to frame narrative, which is not a bad thing, but to understand how we how we came to certain conclusions. But in the moment, often you're just kind of bumbling around and you just happen to be drawn to someone. And then later on, you're like, oh, what does that mean for me? You know?
Yeah.
Also kind of interesting that she wears a burqa, but doesn't need to. It's a kind of interesting character choice.
Yeah. I mean, he also gets mad at her at some point for wearing it.
Right.
Because he feels like she's just in other aspects of her life not really committed to where they came from, like through prayer or anything like that. So he's like, so why are you
he finds
this?
it kind of a surface level thing, and he finds it like actually kind of like misleading and annoying.
Yeah.
He doesn't say that, but that seems to be the implication.
And then he becomes, I remember this, he becomes annoyed with his own sort of like instinctual response or, visceral reaction to her wearing it.
Right.
Which I also get, right? Like I just like that moment because I feel like there are a lot of moments when you're just like, I'm bothered by this thing, but like
I don't
want to
be bothered by it. Totally. Yeah, that's very relatable.
Those are like moments to kind of reflect on why you think a certain way or what's going on in your own head.
Absolutely. The last thing I had was just kind of a little reflection. I wanted to read a bit about Saeed's connection to prayer because I thought it was such a sweet kind of description of what he gets out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes relatively late in the book. We kind of always just see him praying, and seems like maybe it's a way for him to like connect with community members or something he judges Nadia for not doing. But this is like more of an internal monologue.
Mm-hmm.
When Saeed was a child, he had first prayed out of curiosity. He had seen his mother and father praying, and the act held a certain mystery for him. I'm going to read from this passage, but probably like jump around a little bit to make it shorter.
Mm-hmm.
His mother used to pray in her bedroom perhaps once a day, unless it was a particularly holy time or there had been a death in the family or an illness, in which case she prayed more often. His father prayed mainly on Fridays under normal circumstances and only sporadically during the week. He ends up going to pray with his father. Until the end of his days, prayer sometimes reminded Saeed of his mother and his parents' bedroom with its slight smell of perfume and the ceiling fan churning in the heat. As he was entering his teens, Saeed's father asked Saeed if he would like to accompany him to the weekly communal prayer. Saeed would pray with his father and the men, and prayer for him became about being a man, being one of the men, a ritual that connected him to adulthood and to the notion of being a particular sort of man, a gentleman, a gentleman, a man who stood for community and faith and kindness and decency, a man, in other words, like his father. Now, though, in Marine, so the city outside of San Francisco, Saeed prayed even more, several times a day, and he prayed fundamentally as a gesture of love for what had gone and what would go, and could be loved in no other way. When he prayed, he touched his parents, who could not otherwise be touched, and he touched a feeling that we are all children who lose our parents, all of us, every man and woman and boy and girl, and we too will all be lost by those who come after us and love us, and this loss unites humanity, unites every human being. Goes on, and essentially says that he can't really communicate this to Nadia, but he can communicate this to this other woman that he meets. But yeah, I just love that kind of reflection on what it connects him to. And I don't know, I definitely struggle with regular prayer, but I think in the best moments it is a kind of grounding practice.
Yeah, I think that's sweet.
Yeah, I think that's all I had. Do you have any other reflections or thoughts?
I don't. Overall, like I said, I think I found myself getting more and more into it. It wasn't really like a book that I would have picked out for myself. I typically, it's like, I think it's like very different from anything I've ever read. But it was still fun to listen to. And
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Sorry, I said read. Anything I've listened to.
You're typically a pretty nonfiction reader, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. With some exceptions for like, I guess like what's
Lovecraft.
Right, Lovecraft, yeah.
But it was cool.
Good. I'm glad you liked it.
Dig it. What about you?
I love it. I find it a really moving piece, and I enjoyed it even more, I think, actually, the second reading.
Yeah. Really?
Yeah.
Nice. All right. Well, stay tuned. We'll be recording again. I don't think we know what we're doing for next one, do we?
We don't, so you'll find out when we
figure
do.
it out. All right.
Have a good one. Bye.